Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Rocket Lab Weekly. I can't believe it's already episode 37. It's straight weeks.
That's wild.
Yeah, hasn't been a break yet in the show. And so, two housekeeping things. So, one, I was really excited to do this show because there's so much that has happened this week. And I was also really excited because Rocket Lab Weekly was started with Mr. Matt Capital. And I'm excited to have you back on the show.
I appreciate you having me, man. It's always a good time. And it's exciting times for Rocket Lab as well. So I appreciate you having me on and being patient with me as I've been in and out.
No problem. No problem. I have 3 kids, a company to run, and I know life can really come and hit you in the face sometimes. So yeah, it's just things happen. So housekeeping number 2 is last night my baby had a very tough night and I helped my wife, so I had like 4 hours of sleep. So if I start making less sense than Joe Biden, so Matt, please just take me off the stream and you just take over.
Anybody's better than Uncle Joe, man, so I'm sure you'll do great.
Awesome. So how was your week while I set up the
good, man? Yeah. From an investment perspective, the portfolio continues to do really well. I think the only dragger right now is Bitcoin for me. But other than that, the portfolio is up, doing really well. I was doing some quick calculations. I always like to think about how many doubles I am away from my next goal. It's like a Patrick Bet-David thing that he talked about a couple of years ago. And it's just like, how many doubles are you away from 1 million or 10 million or 100 million? And so I was just doing some quick calculations. I'm like, man, I really thought that my next goal was X, but it was actually X plus 20%. So I'm like it's like X plus 25%. So I'm pretty upset that my goal has now moved, but at the same time, it gives me a little bit more to fight for. And I'm making great progress to it as well. So you can't complain with that, but that's kind of the next few things that I'm fighting for. I don't think I'll get there by the end of the year, but hopefully by the end of next year, I'll be able to get there. And then that's a pretty big accomplishment, especially by 34. So hopefully, am I 33? I'm 33. Yes, 33. So by 34, yes, hopefully I'll be able to get there, and it'll be a good time.
Awesome. Well, good luck. And one thing is for sure, I guess if Rocket Lab would go on a crazy ride, it would probably take you there.
I've been thinking about that as well. Like, I don't write covered calls on Rocket Lab down here for obvious reasons, but my hope is like, man, if this thing actually blows up and even just 2 or 3 X's, the money I would make from covered calls, and I'm talking way far out of the money, right? I don't want to get trapped in a
you mean leaps, no?
No, covered calls, far out of the money covered calls that I would write just for a penny here, a penny there. But when you think about it, you have 16, 20,000 shares, just a penny here, a penny there ends up adding up. So I'd probably get as far away as possible just to generate a couple $100 a week. But the thing is nice that I've noticed is the liquidity has picked up quite a bit for Rocket Lab. So hopefully that continues. So that way we can get a little bit more strikes as well, because it's hard doing like a $4.50, $5 strike. It's such a far distance between the strikes. It makes it a little bit difficult.
Yeah. Cool. I want to take the first news of the week. And that is, after years of joking of, every stock going to zero, I freaking finally understand what Matt Money is talking about. And I was kind of pissed when I read this tweet. I was like, why did it take so long to find this info? So do you want to go over this? When you comment Rocket Lab to zero and every stock to zero, what everything you actually mean? Yeah, everything to zero.
So it's kind of a dual meaning, right? So there is obviously the main thing, right, which is I'm super bearish and everything's going to zero, I'm broke, etc. So there's that piece. But then there's also, if you think about life and you think about building portfolios and you think about everything, it's like you build up and you get to a place where you basically hit a breaking point where you break into the next level, right? You go from the first inning to the second inning. You go from the third quarter to the fourth quarter. You go from middle school to high school. You go from college to the corporate world. There's always a place where you are the senior at everything that you do, to the point where you are beginning at the bottom again and trying to build up your learning curve and understand where you're getting to. The stock market is no different than that. Basically, you start at, let's just say, $100 in your portfolio. What's the next thing you want to get to? I want to get to $1,000. You start at $1,000. Next thing you know, you want to get to 10,000, 100,000, a million, and the game doesn't stop. And I think a lot of people don't recognize is like, you'll be stuck at $900,000 in your portfolio for months. And next thing you know, you have a break in it. You make a good investment decision, or the market just plays favorable for you. And next thing you know, you're back at zero. You're at $1 million. And then you realize it's like nothing really changed, right? I'm still in the same game. I'm still trying to grow. But at the end of the day, you're getting yourself back to zero, and you're kind of starting from scratch. So that's kind of what, I never really explain that to people. It's more fun to let people think that I'm being super bearish and, just playing around. But at the end of the day, it's there's a truth to it. You always kind of go back to zero, and you recognize it's like, I'm about to get to that point again here pretty soon. I was just talking about my goal. X was, a certain zero amount, and I realized I needed to get to X plus 25% to get to the real goal. But, X is another zero, right? And that's kind of a thing that'll be like, okay, another little X off the spot that you can kind of put next to your name, but you don't stop at that point, right? And maybe at one point I will, but yeah, I just thought I was sitting in bed this morning, and actually this afternoon, not too long ago, and I was getting ready. I just changed the sheets in the bed, and I was like, let me just lay down for a second. And I wrote that, and I was like, yeah, I think I think it's about time I actually tell the truth and let people know what I'm talking about.
All right, so Mad Money to Zero, everyone. By the way, why Christopher Bell is here, we need your help, Christopher, because there is a mystery launch from Wallops that could be a Rocket Lab Haste mission. I was very confident that it would be a Rocket Lab Haste launch, but I'm less confident now because Rocket Lab has been like, that would technically be the 50th launch for Rocket Lab. But it seems like it's a national security launch, and there's not going to be a live stream. And Rocket Lab has been posting so much about their actual 50th launch that I'm starting to doubt that it's Rocket Lab. But Christopher, you live very close to this, so when you see the launch, please let us know on Twitter or any way, shape, or form that you can if that rocket looked like a modified Electron or it was some other rocket. Cool. So it's actually very interesting. Matt, you're streaming this stream also on your channel, and it looks like the comments on your channel are coming in here. So that's pretty amazing.
That is pretty cool. Amazing. I've never co-streamed before. I see Tevis and company do it for SoFi Weekly, and I always wanted to try it. And you've always had it available, but just never done it. So yeah, we're moving up in the world.
Cool. So now we're gonna start with the real Rocket Lab news, and this episode is going to be very interesting. There's a lot of news to cover. So we start with the funny news. So we are so hungry for news about Archimedes that the Rocket Lab community started seeing things when there were none to see. So there was this tweet by the Rocket Lab photographer going somewhere hot. And I think he made an honest mistake because we started retweeting space talks. I also started retweeting the Rocket Lab photographer flying from LA to a place with a fire can only mean one thing: Archimedes hot fire is happening very soon. And more people were retweeting this. And then it turned out to be a false alarm. He was just going on vacation. It's just funny that there is so many eyes on Rocket Lab and on this hot fire launch that the poor photographer cannot even go on vacation without having to second guess his
what would have been even more funny is if the stock moved like 40% or something.
Yeah.
Because it seems like there's been a little bit of momentum now that we're kind of like got the engine on the test stand. We're like in the 450s. I think at one point we hit $4.70 last week. Now we're back a little bit, but maybe it's because everyone realized that he went to Puerto Rico and not to the test stand.
Yeah. So here's the next news, which also looked very, very exciting. So we had a new influencer buying into Rocket Lab. It's a very small buy, and the speculation started going wild. Amit is finally bullish on Rocket Lab, and he will come on Rocket Lab Weekly. And before Palantir Weekly, I managed to speak to him a little bit. And I asked him, what made you buy? And I was hoping for, like he had an epiphany, or, he sees something we don't see. And he was like, no, man, it was just for fun. I wanted to tweet about it. So it's a huge nothing burger. This was the fun news for the week. And now we go to actual news. So we have this Twitter account, Starship24, who actually goes out to Wallops fairly regularly, and he takes pictures for us about the Neutron infrastructure and how it's going, and they are making crazy good progress. If I remember well, this building was half finished last time he was there, and now look at how finished some of the buildings are. This is the ICF, which I believe is integration something facilities. So they would integrate Neutron here. Matt, what do you think about the progress on the infrastructure?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have gotten down with the news that we pushed basically the launch from Neutron for December of this year to June. And I still think that there's a lot of progress going on. And so this is just nice to see and to show people that, hey, it's really not that far away. Things are still progressing. It's not like things are all halted and the like. So it makes me think that, things will get better with this potentially coming through. But it's nice to see, like, I just try to imagine how much infrastructure Rocket Lab has around the entirety of the United States, and how many people don't recognize that, like places in New Mexico, Long Beach, California, Wallops, Maryland, etc. There's just so much infrastructure that's being put up there. They're really establishing a pretty extensive presence, I think, more than people give them credit for, and more than what you would expect maybe a $2 to $2.5 billion company to have. And so really the thing that I think is really impressive is, the fact that without Neutron spend, they're actually getting very close to break even in terms of their EBITDA. And so, if you kind of normalize for that. And so I'm really confident that once they kind of build this infrastructure and they really get Neutron off the ground, that the EBITDA will be no problem. And everybody's kind of concerned about dilution or anything of the like will probably be in the back of their mind, way far in the back of their minds, not in the forefront of their minds, and anticipating it kind of happening. But you never know. There's always that sort of thought that it could come through. And then again, it just goes to show you how good of integration Rocket Lab is able to do as well. Because not too long ago, they were just a launch company with an Electron rocket, and here they are 4 years later, post-spec, and they have a space systems business, and these guys know how to execute. So I'm not surprised that this building is already up and close to being running.
Yeah. And you brought up an interesting point. I don't know if you saw this podcast that was this week with
I hadn't yet. No, how was it?
It was like he gave some quite good info, but these two guys, they need to let Peter Beck talk. They talked a bit too much, I feel. But anyways, Peter Beck brought up a very interesting point that, in a rocket development program, 20% of the spend and work is actually the rocket, and 80% is the infrastructure that is behind it. And I think he also said it when we interviewed him, that he was making this joke with Adam Spice that it's like they're raising money to pour concrete and build buildings instead of actually flying rockets. And why this is very, very important is because you have to remember that Rocket Lab is not in the same shoes as many of the startup companies who has to show a hot fire test for the investors to keep funding the rocket company. I'm speaking about Relativity. I'm speaking about this rocket factory in Germany. Also, what is the name? Stoke Space. I'm speaking about, and it's very clear from the interviews that Peter Beck is thinking about like bringing a production line into action, and maybe the first launch is delayed, but you're trading in the delay for a much more stable, better line on the other end. And it's a new understanding for me. I didn't see that before, but I'm willing to make this trade any day, because it's not important for us to rush, a hot fire test out the door so that we can check it off and then make rush decisions that will delay the scaling of Neutron, further down the line. So just keep it in mind that they have a track record of, scaling Electron. They have a track record of figuring out, very complex space things like the Varda, what would you call it? Space vehicle. So that they can develop stuff, and I very much trust this team that they're going to do what is right.
Yeah, I think the way I relate to this, it kind of, hopefully it's a good analogy. How much do you go to like auto shows, like the Frankfurt Auto Show or the Paris Auto Show or something like that?
Never been.
So they'll like release like a concept car like 2 or 3 years ahead of time, and everyone's like, oh my God, this car is going to be so great. Like the Hummer is going to be so cool, or the Cybertruck is going to be so cool. And next thing you know, it goes radio silent for like 3 years, 4 years. And then the car finally comes out and it doesn't look anything like that like initial concept car that everyone was super like happy about and stuff like that. That's the exact opposite of what I think Rocket Lab is trying to do.
Yeah.
Right. They're trying to get it out once. They're trying to make it a perfect or near perfect vehicle.
Production. Yeah.
Yeah. And there will be tweaks, right? So there will be things that are added and removed and tweaked. But from what they're testing, I don't think that they're just trying to. And Pete said this when he was on Rocket Lab Weekly with us a few weeks ago. It's basically like they just don't want to light a candle up in the air and then go silent for. It's like once they put the candle in the air, they want to make sure they're ready to go and take on clients and not, basically just like rally up investors. It's like they're here to execute. They're here to actually make things go into space. They're not here to just like be a bunch of marketing kind of fools that, just make people kind of happy from an investor perspective. It's like, no, they actually care and have passion for what they're doing. And they want to make sure that the first time they light it is as good as going to be the second time as they light it. And yes, there will be tweaks, but they don't want to put in a subpar product that could jeopardize the vision and the brand of the company. Because I think in the industry, the brand is quite strong. Yeah. It might not necessarily have the strength of, say, a SpaceX or something like that, but the brand for Rocket Lab, I think, is continuing to build and continue to get stronger every day. And so the hope is that once they light it, they'll have a very successful first mission, and the brand will continue to build.
Yeah. Cool. So where were we before we were looking at the Neutron. Oh yeah. So the next update that came from Rocket Lab is an Archimedes update. Just want to make sure I'm sharing. Yeah, exactly. So they posted this video and they gave us where they are. I don't know the exact order and what they need to do. I just know that Peter Beck has said that it's a series of 50 tests that will be done through 3 to 4 weeks. And I really think that the actual hot fire is very, very close. They don't have any leaks at this point. So they are ahead of the Starliner that is up in space, actually. So that's a very good sign. And yeah, engine stand operation validated. I'm not a rocket scientist, but when I read this, it feels like it's very close. So what is your view on Archimedes hot fire? And curious, do you think that there's going to be a rally, like once they post a picture that they did like a hot fire test on the engine? Do you think the stock is going to rally?
Hot fire test. I don't know if it's going to rally per se. I do think you'll see some support. I don't know, rally. That's a good.
I mean,
that's a good question.
technically, it's because they said that they are not closing or signing Neutron contracts because the development is too uncertain for customers to be able to commit to dates. And then they basically said that the minute you have the hot fire, then the actual program timeline gets quite solidified, and it should be good enough that they can start signing like big contracts with customers. Now it's like if the stock goes up on the hot fire test, it's jumping the gun, but we know that it should logically mean that there should be big Neutron contracts coming very soon after the hot fire.
Yeah, I definitely think that it'll support the forward business momentum that they can carry. I think it'll allow them to start negotiating contracts about when they can actually start putting things up into orbit. And I think it'll help from a. I don't see there's going to be any downside for sure. I guess my question would be, is it really going to be as impactful, right? Just like how all the launches, I think people always assume when they buy into Rocket Lab, ooh, there's a launch. Oh, it's going to be successful. Oh, it's going to move the stock price, and it never does. I think it's going to take some time.
The last two launches, Rocket Lab was green after. So I was like,
surprisingly.
It's very surprising because the norm has been like 5 to 7% drop after successful launches. But
right. We'll see. I think it's not bad by any means. I just think we'll have to see. I maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe they'll have a couple 10 or so % days one after another. I'd be excited, but I'm also not fully invested yet. I was doing some calculations and I was like, to get to where I want to be with this position, I was like, I started dividing the numbers and being like, oh, the stock price would have to get to X in order for me to get to. I was like, ugh. It's like I really need to I'm already like maybe 60% of the position size that I want to be. I would like to get it closer to 25,000. I think I'm only at 16.5. So
I want to say this is such an important point for me, and I want to point it out to the audience that you're thinking backwards.
Yeah.
Meaning, because I feel that there is some people who think that Rocket Lab is going to 1000x next month, and then whatever small money they have in Rocket Lab is going to be, millions and millions of dollars, which might happen. But like if we look more and more realistically, like Rocket Lab, doubling, tripling is very, very easily realistic in a few years. I think in my universe, even 10xing is like for me, it's like quite a safe bet, to bet on that. And yes, there is a potential if things go insanely well, then maybe the stock is going to 100x from here. But the problem is that if you have a financial goal of let's say reaching $1 million, and then you put $1,000 into Rocket Lab, you're not going to reach the goal if the stock even 10x's, which is an unbelievable, like you will not catch a lot of stocks in your life that is going to 10x.
Right.
So everybody needs to think with I think it's better to go backwards and say like, okay, if the stock 10x's, I would like to have $1 million, then you need to have $100,000 invested. And maybe your goal is not $1 million, maybe your goal is $100,000, then you need to have $10,000 invested. And yes, maybe it goes to the moon and back, then it's all the better, right?
Right. And that was kind of the mental thought that I was having this morning. Is like I feel safe if you look at it from it'll eventually be a couple $100,000 position. You have like 80-some thousand or 90-some $1,000 invested at this point. My thought process was like, okay, well, what would it take for me to get to about $1 million? And I think it would take like a 12 or 13x from here. And I'm like, okay, so the company is worth about 2.2 billion right now. That would mean it has to get to a market cap of about 30 billion. I'm like, realistic? Yeah, it's realistic. But I think the thing that I would like to have is a little bit more certainty. I feel like getting to closer to about an 8 or 10x would probably be better. And that's what gets me to wanting to really only have the company have to get closer to 10x from here for me, or to really get to a place that I want to be. So that made me kind of realize, okay, you need to get closer to the 25,000 share mark, because by the 25,000, that would mean you really only need the company to go up. I don't remember what it was, but what was it? It was $1 million divided by 25,000. You needed to get to $40 a share. And it's currently at, $450 or whatever like that. So it means you only have to get to about 20 billion in market cap, or 22 billion in market cap. So it literally makes it 30% easier for you to get to your goal just by having a little bit more shares. And I think that that's more realistic. Get closer to 20 billion. Do I think that this company could eventually be 50 billion? I think so. I think there's a possibility, but I'm trying to organize myself and give myself the opportunity to benefit even on a downside case where the company only goes up, let's just say, to 20 or $25 billion. Because that's also an opportunity. Something could always happen. Other players can come into the market. People think that SpaceX is the only game in town. Well, I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised by, or maybe not pleasantly surprised by, Rocket Lab coming in and stealing some of that market share. But there's always room for a third or fourth large player to kind of come in. And we haven't necessarily seen all from Blue Origin yet. We haven't necessarily seen all from ULA. And so with that, I just want to make sure, even on a downside case, I have that opportunity to still financially benefit.
Yeah. Cool. We go to the next one. I'm sure you've seen this news that New Mexico, the solar plant in New Mexico, is getting a $23.9 million funding via the CHIPS Act to expand production of the space solar cells in Albuquerque. And on top of it, they are getting $25.5 million in federal assistance and incentives to expand production, which is from the federal state of New Mexico. So New Mexico is giving them $25.5 million, and they are getting $23.9 million via the CHIPS Act. We know that they have a $150 million contract with a big space prime with 30% gross margins. And this company, Solero, was acquired for $80 million. So this transaction nets them almost 60% of what they bought Solero for originally. Matt, what were your thoughts when you saw this contract?
I think a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's only however many millions of dollars." I don't think that that's the point. I think the point is that it's continued investment and continued grants within a very important piece of Rocket Lab's revenue streams. I don't think people have given credit enough to the Solero acquisition. It's helping power some of the missions that NASA and SpaceX have actually just sent to Jupiter. It's going to help power many future missions as well. And so, this is just another feather in the cap to show that Solero is and has been a phenomenal chess move by Alex and Pete to continue to build on an amazing sort of track record. And I hope the acquisition that comes next with the potential convertible notes that we had done a few months ago is as lucrative as what we've done with Solero. And I'm hoping that they have a good project in mind, because it's only been phenomenal. And I think we'll only continue to get better as the backlog runs out. And Alex talks about this always in every conference call. They're always talking about, what's the gross margin for Solero? What's the gross margin for Solero? And you can see it there. It's about 30% gross margin for a large, kind of contract. Now, I think it'll probably get closer to eventually 40% in the long term, maybe hopefully even more so, maybe closer to 50. I don't know. But there's only good things coming from the Solero side of the business.
Yeah. And it's also interesting to point out that this is a strategic asset in satellite manufacturing, because I believe that there is 3 solar providers on the planet that people can buy from, and all of them are very like bottlenecked in production. So when Rocket Lab scales the factory, it means that when they bid for government programs to like the SDA program that they bid for, they avoid margin stacking, and that would be that they have to buy solar panels from other suppliers who also have to have their own margin, and then they have to add Rocket Lab margin on it, so that they are a lot more price competitive. And on top of it, they can prioritize themselves, and then the schedule, when they tell the government that it will take us 1 year to develop those satellites, then the government can trust this timeline. So this is a very, very strategic asset, and it's quite amazing that this crown jewel asset is the growth of that is being financed by government money. It's like very, very smart how it's playing out. And Francisco is also saying, and also that there's only 2 here, the rest are in Russia and China. I guess Francisco means like solar providers.
I think there's a gentleman, Dave Huntsman, who's saying, we're forgetting all the other middle sort of the road rocket companies like Firefly and Astra and the relativities of the world. And I think the reality is those guys need money right now. They don't have any, and they also have.
But they don't have solar, no?
No, they don't. I think they're just talking about launch and how we're forgetting to, we're neglecting them. I know it's a different topic jump, but I think just answering those sorts of questions, I think, it's not to say that they're bad companies. I just think that they don't have the capital right now to kind of continue going, right? Astra just had to go private for a fraction of what it was on for IPO. You see Velo 3D. Everyone was kind of hailing Velo 3D as a 3D printing company that was absolutely phenomenal. And they're, cutting staff and they're not growing. And I have a feeling that a lot of these companies, Relativity, Firefly, etc., are going to be doing the same. They don't have the financial runway that Rocket Lab has put themselves into, because they're actually starting to generate pretty decent revenue. Not to say that the other guys aren't, but they don't have the cadence. They don't have the space systems business that Rocket Lab does. That's actually providing revenue and at least something to fall back on. So I think those guys are going to struggle. I think eventually, maybe 1 or 2 of them will continue to pull through. But I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 2 to 3 years, you see more of those players dropping out. And then ET FaceTime Home just brought up Black Sky. Black Sky actually is getting to a place where they're EBITDA positive. I've actually been thinking about, they're a relatively cheap company. I wonder if that's one of the companies that Rocket Lab is actually thinking about potentially buying. They've done a few launches with Rocket Lab in the past. So we'll see.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's almost like what is coming, because the next topic was going to be celebrating the 50th launch for Rocket Lab.
5-0, not 5, like some of these other companies.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't, because like if you look at the Falcon 9 is launching 130 this year, or 150, I think is the goal, and Rocket Lab is struggling to get to 22. But Falcon 9 is a much older rocket than Electron. So if you actually adjust back to, like year 0, and you look at like how much did Falcon 9 launch in year 0, how much did Electron launch in year 0, and you go like year 1, year 2, and you make that chart, then surprisingly, Electron has reached the 50th launch faster than any other commercially developed rocket in history. They have the Falcon 9 here. I don't know these other rockets. Do you know these other rockets, Matt?
I don't know much about them, no.
Okay, but they're in any ways in a different class. Like one can very clearly see that it's Electron and Falcon 9 where the game is. And I just wanted to go over with the audience. This is the press release for the next launch, and they are bringing up some statistics or like interesting things about the Electron, where it has broken records. So we just quickly go over and then we see what we think about this. But so it was the first 3D printed orbital rocket engine, the first engine to be powered by electric pumps instead of a traditional gas turbine, which, by the way, was supposed to be impossible. First carbon composite orbital class rocket, launched from the world's first orbital launch site, enabled the first lunar mission launched by a small rocket. That was the Capstone mission, and completed the first dedicated launch for the NRO from a spaceport outside the US. Then here is Electron by the numbers. So 50 launches, including HASTE, 46 missions from New Zealand, 4 missions only from Virginia, which, by the way, surprised me. I guess they need to scale up there. They launched 190 satellites, 499 Rutherford engines launched, and 7 years and 25 days between flight 1 and 50. The missions that were enabled by Electron is communication, Earth observation, national security, climate science, lunar exploration, research and development, rendezvous and proximity operations, weather monitoring, hypersonic testing. These are the Electron customers. Very impressive companies. Here are the patches. I'm going to start buying patches for the mission. And the last thing, which is very, very interesting, is I hope you guys can see it on the screen, how the launch pad looked like when Electron was first launched. You can clearly see this is LC1A, and then they have built a second pad here, which is LC1B. This is how the control center evolved. It's a tiny bit better as it is now. And here is another look at the control center. You can see this is the Electron factory, like the wall is up here. This is very extensively built out with a lot of rockets in production now. And this was the craziest for me. So this is all the Rocket Lab employees. Back then, in one picture, it was about 150 employees compared to what the company looks like now. And this is not all the employees. Like, all these pictures are different factories, and they have about 2,000 employees now. I'm sure that all these pictures are not 2,000 employees. So very, very impressive growth there. So Matt, what do you think about the 50th launch of Electron? How significant is it? And yeah, like the statistics of Electron.
I don't think many companies get to 50. So I think it's another feather in the cap of Rocket Lab. And somebody did point out, I'm surprised they've only done one HASTE mission. I'm kind of surprised by that too. I know they have a lot planned for 2025, and they've only really done the one in June or July of 2023. So I'm surprised, that they haven't really. I know they're supposed to do some this year, but I haven't seen any come through. I know they had some in the manifest for this year, but I forgot about that. But I think it's just showing the continued dominance, and a lot of that is not just launch. I know we talk a lot about launch. We mostly stream the launches, but a lot of that is also the space systems and the acquisitions that happened in 2021 and 2022, and the integration. And I'd say I'm very impressed. Most companies, when they integrate, it take a lot of time to churn, and these guys have really been able to integrate it into the company as a whole, and not only integrate it and get the revenue out, but also grow the revenue at a pretty substantial basis to be able to add meaningful impact to the bottom line, and or even just top line growth. You haven't really seen it from the bottom line at the moment, but I guess we're not as hemorrhaging as much cash as we should be. But hopefully within the near term, we'll actually start to see some EBITDA positive quarters. And I think that the growth of the company going from 150 just a few years ago to 2,000 is a huge accomplishment. I'm looking forward to seeing what the long-term, you know, amount that Electron can launch is. I'm curious to see what the long-term cadence of a Neutron could be. I think we're going to hit 20 or close to 20 this year, which is about double what we had last year in terms of Electron launches. But I don't know what the peak is, right? I don't know if we have enough customers to even test that as of yet. But will it eventually be 40 launches per year? Will it be 50? I'm fairly confident that the size of the factories that we have in both North America as well as New Zealand have the ability to accommodate up to 50 launches per annum. But we'll see if we actually get there. And then I'm curious to see how many launches we have for Neutron, because that is a direct competitor or close to a direct competitor to the Falcon 9. And they're aiming for over 100 launches this year, I think, on Falcon 9, which is pretty impressive, to say the least. So I'm curious to see what when we get Neutron up and going, how quick it relates to that graphic that you showed, and will they get closer to 50 launches from Neutron faster than they did for Electron? Fingers crossed that they will. But then again, I think the benefit that Neutron will face is that, and they always talk about this in the conference calls, is will Rocket Lab have their own meta constellation that they're launching, and so they don't have to rely on waiting for other customers. And that might be, part of what hastens the launch cadence for a Neutron getting to 50 compared to Electron, where we've mostly been waiting on partners to be able to get their satellites ready and delaying out in time. I think last year, 2023, our goal was 15 launches or 14 launches, and we got 10. This year, we were supposed to be getting 22, and I think we're now on track for a little bit fewer than that because we've had to delay a little bit into the next quarter. So anyway.
Yeah, there is like this launch that is coming now. The 50th launch is the fourth one this quarter. And there is talk that there might be one more launch this quarter. If that would happen, we would be at 9 launches in 6 months. And I would say that then we're almost on track to hit the 22. Now, I mean, I know that I'm just saying if they just do 5 and 5 in Q3 and Q4, then we would be at 19, which is pretty damn close to the 22. I just want to I saw a lot of people reacting on that it was one haste, and I believe I started looking, and so on the presentations they presented like haste contracts, but they have not been delivered on yet, and I think that this is what causes the confusion. And the haste is it's not really pre-announced as far as I understand. Like they just get a call from the government that we're going to launch within 2 days, and now you need to be ready, and then they launch. So it's not really something that we will know about when it happens. So yeah, stay tuned, I guess. But yeah, it has only been one launch so far for haste. Cool. So now, yeah, the next topic would have been, but we already jumped to this one, this podcast with Peter Beck, but we kind of covered that one already. The next very interesting news that is coming for Rocket Lab is Ashley Vance's film, Wild Wild Space, I think it's called, is debuting today in Washington, D.C. And if I'm lucky, I'm going to be watching this tomorrow. This documentary is supposed to be built on Ashley Vance's book. I'm very, very, very excited to see this film. And Ashley Vance actually said that he would come on Rocket Lab Weekly after the film has been released. So that's also very exciting. Matt, are you going to watch this? And
yeah, man, I actually have ordered the book, and I'm kicking myself that I haven't actually been able to read the book yet. So I'm pretty upset that I never ended up reading it. yeah, I'll definitely be a watcher. I was pretty excited to hear when Ashley has been kind of teasing that he was going to be making this documentary. So I'm curious to see how it goes. But I'm excited because it's going to be the first of many. I assume not only by Ashley, but I'm assuming by a lot of people in the industry, and it'll be a lot of fun to kind of keep track of. It kind of feels like we're in the 60s again with the space race.
Yeah. Except it's sustainable now because it's not the government spending like 3% of the GDP on space. It's actually venture capitalists. Yeah. So Golf Channel is asking, where can we see this? As far as I understand, it's going to be released on HBO Max. But and I think it's the US HBO Max. So if that is the case, that it's US only, I might need some help from some of you guys to share your account or something, and I can pay for it, and then we do like some VPN or something. It might be like, I obviously have to see this film, but if it's not available in Sweden, I have to be really smart about how I do it. So I might need some help on this. Yeah, Fool's Gold. I would like to live stream it. I'm not sure how happy Ashley would be if I live stream the film on the channel. I'm pretty sure it's copyrighted, but maybe I can share some very good clips about it.
Yeah, maybe we could put together like a trailer or something for it, if there isn't already one that's going to be released. I'm sure there will be.
Yeah. Cool. Let me see this comment here. Trump Space Force may be a good push for the stock. Should Trump get elected? Okay, curious. The election, do you think that, because I feel like it doesn't matter who wins, because of when it comes to Rocket Lab, when it comes to other things, it has a lot more meaning. But I feel that the rocket technology is currently very needed because of certain geopolitical situations that are there. And I don't think any administration would slow down the research and the constellations and the plans that they have. But what is your view on this?
I think even before the election, I'm seeing a lot more work with Space Force and the Air Force going on with even just Palantir. And that makes me bullish that there's a lot going on. And I'm very confident that there's going to be further SDA, Space Development Agency, contracts coming down the pipeline. And I think we're going to hear more about it even with Neutron. Knowing that a lot of those satellites that Rocket Lab is creating at the moment can't be launched by an Electron. I think a lot of them have to be launched by a Neutron or equivalent, whether that's Falcon 9. So I think that there's that piece. But I think you're going to see a lot more from Trump if he does get elected in the Space Force arena. He obviously was the one that created the Space Force. Everyone knocked him. Now I think everyone understands why it's relevant with some of the space heating up again, with China just landing on the backside of the moon, India going to the moon recently. So a lot of folks are now kind of back into the space race piece and recognize that it's probably pertinent more now than ever to make sure that you secure your homelands, because the best fences make the best neighbors, right? Or something like that, or neighbors mind their fences or something like that. That's kind of an old kind of term. And it always strikes home for me because we have some really good neighbors in Pennsylvania at my mom's house. And even still, the property line is lined by a large, stone wall that, it's just pebbles, right? Just pebbles that kind of create a wall that's about like 6 inches to a foot high. But still goes to show you that, if you need a neighbor, you can walk through it, but there's still that line, right? You're entering their house when that happens. And so space, I think, having those kind of satellites up there and being able to monitor, will help from a long-term perspective. And I don't think that Space Force will be anything that goes away, even if Trump doesn't get elected. but I definitely think there's going to be an acceleration. So it's definitely potentially bullish for the stock. Yeah.
So okay, to translate what you were saying, if Biden goes in, it's neutral, like then the already existing programs just continue running, and we already know it's sort of a hockey stick already, like that's what Adam Spice was saying, and then Trump would basically pour gasoline on the already fire.
I think so. That's my thought process. But yeah, right. I mean, Gators.
I don't have an answer.
Alexa, stop. I don't know what she's listening in. She's giving details to Jeff to get back to Blue Origin. The person in my chat, Gators Rock Tim, I think makes a good point, right? A lot of this is made available because of the defunding that Obama did back in 2013, and I was so gutted by that. I was actually really excited when SpaceX was getting back after it, but it made me kind of happy. And I think in reality, maybe Obama was smart. Maybe he actually knew that the private space industry was actually coming through, and he recognized, like, instead of it being kind of a public endeavor, if you make it privatized, then you'll spend a lot less going forward. And so maybe he had that forethought. So maybe I shouldn't hit on him too bad, because originally I was like, what the hell is Obama doing? But in reality, it may have fueled a greater competition, which actually makes things a lot cheaper and innovates a lot more in the long term. So who knows? But then another person asked, what's the competition? There's Verizon and AT&T and Sprint, right? There's enough room, especially in a developing total addressable market, for multiple people to be there. But I think another thing is I don't really think SpaceX is out there creating too many satellites that are not associated with Starlink. I think the only satellites that they do are created with Starlink. Not to say that's not a profitable endeavor. Obviously it is. But are they creating the solar panels for it? Or who's the ones that created the solar panels for all those SpaceX satellites? I don't know. And
it's homemade. They use the non-space grade, completely normal solar that is supposed to break down, and they just don't care.
Okay, there you go.
They have so cheap to launch and so cheap to manage the satellites that they're like, yeah, if the solar panels stop working, we just deorbit and send new satellites.
Yeah, they send up so many anyway, right? So I guess you really, instead of it being like, okay, well, instead of a 30-year life for a normal solar panel, it's in space, so maybe it's only got a 4-year life, but it's going to fall out of the sky in 3 years anyway. So why does it matter?
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I read somewhere, I don't remember where, that the space grade solar is probably 5x or maybe 10x as expensive as just like the normal solar that you and me would buy. And then everybody else is using space grade solar on every satellite. And SpaceX is the only one who's like, F that. We just go to the local store, buy solar panels and strap them on the satellites, and we don't care. Like it's working for them. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah. So as closing for this episode, I wanted to just go over the stock price a little bit and what happened this week. I want to give my version, and then maybe we can hear your version on future catalysts and what will happen. So obviously we have been on a tear. We bottomed out at three basically all-time lows, or we touched on the all-time lows. We didn't get lower, and then we went up in a straight line to the 450, 460 range. And obviously you can't go up in a straight line without taking a breather. And it looked like we were going to break out from this resting period. And we had this unbelievable candle based on the inflation report that came in. And the inflation report was very, very good, but then the Fed came out and they basically were very hawkish. They raised the long-term interest rate goal. I believe it went from 2.6 to 2.8, which basically means that that's the end of the rate like when they're done with the rate decrease cycle, like they think it's going to land on 2.8 instead of 2.6, and they raised the like what we're going to exit the year as. So like previously, I think it was like 4.9 that we would exit the year at as the national interest rate in the US, and they raised that to 5.1, which is just one rate cut. So that was obviously hitting growth stocks very bad. So that I'm pretty sure that that's why we had this 2-day sell-off. And I think that the stock here is a spring-loaded because there is so much good news. I think that is going to happen. We have the hot fire test coming up. I believe, Adam Spice said that the goal is to get to 2 billion in backlog this year. There's 6 months left, and the backlog is still at 1 billion. So the only way to go from 1 billion to 2 billion is that you have to sell 1 billion in contracts. I don't believe that it's going to be one contract. I think it will be multiple contracts that should be announced. The earnings that is coming is going to be amazing. So wherever I go, I just see like catalyst after catalyst after catalyst. So I'm very happy that I have a fully built out position in Rocket Lab, and I don't dare to write cover calls at this level. But Matt, what do you think? What is your prediction on the stock?
On the price, or
yeah, like what catalysts do you see that are coming for the stock? Do you see any like negatives that are coming for the stock?
I think there's still some negatives. I think there's potential for the delay, continued delays to potentially happen. But I think in reality, to me, the thing that's most important is continued execution on the Neutron front. I think any delays with that will have a decent impact. But the thing that I think will be a catalyst to the stock will be a hot fire test. I think that there'll be a little bit of love for that. I think also if there's any sort of potential commitments or future SDA contracts that get done, I think that's another potential 500 million in backlog that could easily come through, just like we saw the 18 satellites coming from 27 to 29 that they'll be delivering for the SDA now, whatever the future tranches are. So there's those potentials. And then also if there's a launch contract associated with that in 27 to 29, I think if you get a positive hot fire test and a few more tank tests, I think that you have the opportunity to then get the launch side of that SDA contract. And each of those Neutron launches will be about $50 million a piece. And so if you're able to get a few of those SDA launch contracts under your belt, then that's going to be 50 million a pop. You can get and start stacking up to 2 billion rather quickly. It's just I feel like within the next year is going to be tough, but I feel like 5 billion in backlog is easy within the next 5 years, but getting to 2 billion next year is tough because you have to hit a bunch of milestones before that, right? Like you have to be able to get Neutron up and running. So I don't know, but I think that a $5 billion backlog within 5 years is something that we should actually be talking about rather than trying to get to 2 billion. But there are baby steps, right? So I think the SDA contracts, Neutron, that'll probably be the biggest pieces, but maybe there's more. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to cry if we only get to 1.5 billion, because being a Palantir shareholder for many, many years, who also has a lot of deals with the government, we know that, I mean, how many times did we think we're getting the NHS deal and then it was just, being pushed later, but it still came, So even if we only get to 1.5 billion in backlog, it's fantastic, especially with having delivered 400 million this year. That means that it's like 3-year production is sold ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing, is stabilizing at 1 billion, and I would hope that we see that in Q3 is that stabilization point, because if you're able to just even sustain, that's a good piece. So then you can always build from there. So that means obviously if you're sustaining that, you're continuing to get more work. And if you're growing as expansively as we have been, going about an 80% growth rate year over year, that's kind of the hope for fiscal year 24. And you're able to sustain $1 billion in backlog, that's impressive. And if we get to 2 billion, then that's great. But you know, and that'll obviously be necessary as we continue to grow. But I think it's going to take some time. 2 billion will be tough, especially if you're considering it for, if you're saying the next 12 months, I see it. If you're saying the next 6 months before year end 2024, that's going to be a tough one. And I believe in Alex. You know, I'm not saying he's a liar, but I see it a lot easier once you have Neutron pretty much flying in the sky to have a huge backlog. But before then, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, yeah. I believe it depends on the government, and that's like, you're not in control of the government. They are in control of you.
but it also, it could do a lot with that contract that, you know, they had just noted in the Q1 earnings call. You know, the one that we couldn't really talk much about and ask them about. Remember when we were like, can we ask them about X contract, and they said not yet, right? That things in the future. So that could be a couple $100 million. I wouldn't be surprised. I think it was up to 150 million or something like that.
But you see that one is already announced, but it's not counted in the backlog. So
exactly.
So it's a bit tricky.
And that one could also, depending on what it is, attribute more to the backlog in the future, right? That could be 150 million a year, or you know what I mean? So that could be something that's true, actually. That if, for example, because also the solar deal of 150 million that they got, only 30 million is calculated in the backlog, right? So it's like, technically, from the things that we suspect are there, because there is a reaction wheel mysterious contract, there is the solar contract, like they could go up almost 300 million on just those two. And I guess it just has to do with that currently the orders are still reversible by the customers. So there may be like letter of intents, or I don't know, like a loose order that we are planning to order, but we don't really put in the order yet. Right.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the end for this episode. I really like this episode. We had jokes, you know, news. We
Jeff listening in. Yeah.
Say that again. Who listened in?
Jeff listening in.
Yeah, exactly. Blue Origin was checking on their competitors' podcast here, and I want to shout out to the channel members for both Matt and me. It's really cool to be on two channels at once. I don't know if we can trust the view count. It says that we have 377 viewers. It could be it's counting the two channels together. I don't know.
It might be. I have it on X as well, so that might be it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I have 15 right now. You probably have closer to 40. You always generally do pretty good.
Jeff, who? Cool, guys. Well, thank you everyone for showing up. Please make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you guys next week.
See you next week. Thanks for having me, Vince.
Yeah, thanks for coming.